All right, so I did say that I would kind of point out tablet things on occasion, but I wasn't really going to talk about them. So there are lots of good tablet-based visual schedule apps. They need the person to understand two-dimensional. You can't do 3D representation on the iPad. So if you've got a person who requires object cues, the iPad is out, period, right? Because it's not 2D, or it's not 3D rather. If you're going to use the tablet for visual scheduling, then you should be using that tablet for nothing else, right? Because if the visual schedule is gone because I'm now playing Angry Birds, how do we get back to the schedule? We don't. Yeah.
Would you also say that if they're using like touch chat?
Absolutely. If you are using a tablet for augmentative and alternative communication, and we'll probably come back and talk about this tomorrow as well, but if you're using an app for communication, that is the only thing that should be on that tablet. Because if you close down the communication app, whether it's touch chat or Proloquo to Go or whatever, I don't care, as soon as you close it down to play something else, you no longer can communicate, right? Would you remove a child's voice box? Let me take your voice box out so that you can play a game. Ridiculous, right? So, if the iPad is their communication, it's their voice, it needs to be available 100% of the time.
Could you tell us funding unit that?
I know, I'm sorry, I can't. But it is best practice. We could probably find some literature that might help the funding unit understand that, but it's important, right? And we need to prioritize. If we require AAC and we're gonna use our iPad for AAC, then that's what we need to use it for. And you know what? We did other learning activities before iPads, just fine, right? So if we decide that we're gonna use our iPad for AAC, the kid's not gonna die if he doesn't play Angry Birds. Children lived without Angry Birds. Right? They'll be okay, right? They'll be okay without YouTube. We might not be, but they will live. You know, so you have to think about if we're gonna use a tablet, and this talk comes from the whole iPad talk, so I'm not gonna get into it too much, but it's really important to think about why am I using the tablet? What am I using it for? Prioritize your use, and then use it for that. So if you're using it for scheduling, it's your schedule. Perhaps later when a person's pretty competent and they can flip back and forth and we're not worrying about a lot of problem behavior around transition, for visual schedules, maybe. For AAC, never. That's your voice, right? And as soon as you close out of your voice, you don't have a voice anymore, right? So that's best practice. Right, and I know it's not always a popular thing to talk about. We're not going to talk about it anymore. If you want to come and debate that with me later, I'm happy to debate that. But right, if I take away a kid's voice box, they can no longer communicate. It's the same thing as if they have an AAC app on their tablet and we close it off to do something else. They can't communicate about even what they're doing because their AAC app is gone. Okay? So these are some of the apps. If you're interested in apps for visual scheduling, these are 5 of the best you can go and take a look at. All right, so let's talk about some of the other things that we can teach with a visual schedule. So visual schedules are great for making things more predictable, but we can also teach stuff. So it's like, if you've got people who are resistant to visual schedules, right, say, well, not only will it make life predictable, but we can also teach things to the kid, right? That also sometimes gets people on board if they're kind of, I don't know that we really need a visual schedule. Oh, we can teach so many things. We can teach individuals who might be functioning at a much lower level in terms of their functioning level. They might not even know like how to orient pictures so that they're looking at things right side up. We can target that in our visual schedule, teaching individuals which is the right side up and working left to right and top to bottom. We can teach receptive communication or receptive language skills. So when we're setting up the schedule and I have all the symbols or all the objects or all of the whatever laid out, and I say, okay, first we're going to get dressed. Where's get dressed? And they find the symbol for get dressed. They have to pay attention to me. They have to orient to what I'm saying. They have to hear and understand get dressed, and then they have to find that symbol, right? So there are a whole bunch of skills there. We can work on expressive communication skills. So throughout the day, as we're transitioning, okay, this is finished, what's next? What are we doing after such and such? So I can ask questions that are related to the schedule that the individual can then answer. So we can be working on communication skills that way. We can also work on time concepts and time vocabulary. So within a schedule, you're talking about things being first, second, third, next, last, before, after, later. You can take all of those words and map them onto your visual schedule and use them when you're referring back to your visual schedule as a way to teach those things, right? So a visual schedule is not just about here's the order of events. We can use that visual schedule to teach all kinds of stuff. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again because it's important. Have text. Have a text title on your photos. Have a text title on your symbols so that people are seeing the text, because some of our kids will memorize those chunks and they'll learn what those words are. Now, this is very different from real reading. I mean, my whole literacy talk is a whole different talk. But they can gain some sight recognition skills, some sight word recognition skills. That's not a bad thing, right? So if they see get dressed, the words paired with the picture often enough, they may get to the point where when they see get dressed, they know what that means, and then we can move to a text-based schedule. Check, 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 right? Like that kind of schedule. So certainly, it's an opportunity to expose individuals to sight words. So always make sure that you've got text, because you never know who's paying attention to it and who's reading, right? And sometimes it surprises you. The kids that you think are not paying attention to text are paying attention to text and are learning to read some words, right? It also makes sure that everybody calls the same activity the same thing, right? So there's some sort of consistency in labels of activities. And then some things to think about, right? The kinds of things you need to think about that are often in relation to the symbols, right? Making sure that the representation you're using is appropriate for the student. So again, it comes back to that symbol assessment discussion that we had this morning. Make sure that you're using a symbol that makes sense to the kid, because there's no point in giving a schedule to an individual with a bunch of representations that they don't understand, thinking that that's going to make their life more predictable. If they don't understand picture communication symbols, a schedule full of picture communication symbols is not going to make that information any more clear. Right? But if photos make sense to them, providing them a schedule with photos does make things more clear. So you have to make sure that you're matching the representation. Think about the size of the symbol, the visual acuity stuff. Think about color versus black and white, right? All of those things that we talked about in relation to symbol assessment, that's important. Think about portability. Do I need this schedule to move with the individual from place to place, right? If I'm talking about a little preschooler who's mostly at home, portability is less of an issue, right? Although still, if we want mom to take the kid to the grocery store or the library or the park, there needs to be some degree of portability so that we can take our schedule with us to those places. But often as individuals age, they really require schedule systems that are portable, because individuals are going to school, doing things in the community, going different places. So you need to think about, for whatever kind of representation system I'm using, how am I going to make the schedule relevant and appropriate for the individual and sufficiently portable, right? Most often that's challenging when we're talking about object cues, right? Object cues are difficult to make portable, but I talked this morning about a few of the ways that you can do that kind of cleverly, right? The mom with the little handle and the boxes that went in her car, for example. Right? So you can sort of get creative and think your way around that. And then also just think about the preferences of the individual. Right, so I mentioned I've had teenagers who require a symbol-based visual schedule, but they don't want everybody else to know that they have one. Well, that's their preference, right? So they prefer a schedule system in little slide pockets that they can put in a binder so that they're carrying a binder around that looks like all the other kids carrying a binder. That's a preference that they have. So as much as possible, right, we have to make sure that the schedule is appropriate for the individual. But wherever I can offer up choices in terms of how the schedule is set up, I want to do that, right? What do you prefer in terms of the way your schedule system works, right? So think about those kinds of things too. Those are important.